Well, welcome back, everyone, to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath. Thanks for joining us again. Wanted just to start by a quick reminder of the point and premise of the show as we welcome my guest today, Clint Kamua, who's a colleague of mine over here at EP Wealth Advisors. Both Clint and I, actually, we've been working in the business of financial services, sitting across kitchen tables and coffee tables with folks for, I think in Clint's case, almost 25 years. I'm 22 years. And we've just learned a lot by how to best coach people, how to help them make good financial decisions. And the thought of the show is built upon that experience, the idea that if we can help people make better decisions with their money, and either relieve financial pressure or help them accomplish a highly important goal, or all of the above, that makes them a better, father and mother, or husband and wife, or employer, employee, community member. And so our thought between Clint and I, as we talk a lot as colleagues, but as a firm at EP Wealth Advisors, we wanted to be able to find means and ways to get to people and maybe talk about some of the timeless principles that we've all learned over time. So in the past shows, we've talked about, through other guests, the value and the importance of things like being patient, not just with your portfolio, but with your financial plan. There's things that just take some time to play out, whether that be a saving for a particular goal or the process of paying down debt over a period of time, or just allowing an investment portfolio to breathe a little bit, even though at times it gets volatile. We also talked about the idea of persevering through difficult times and financially, not letting the emotions get the best of you, but to just continue to work through the plan that you've laid out. And just kind of seek it through. Behind a lot of that, we've talked a lot about from people from government here locally to people who started and run nonprofit organizations, the idea of having a purpose, not just with your money, but with your time and your talent as well, and how important that is to give us some intention as to why we're investing, why we save, and so on. So we've talked a lot of really good things. And I think one of the best ways to sum that up is a story that I heard, and Clint here is going to recognize it, but it was this idea of 3 questions. And the first question was, it's kind of this imaginary situation. Imagine that you have all the money that you'll ever need. You will never need to worry about making money again. You can do what you need to do financially. What is it that you do next? Do you change what you're doing presently? Would you drop your career and start over? Or what would you do? The next 2 get a little bit more negative. The first one says you have 5 years left to live, according to your doctor. The good news is you won't feel sick, but the bad news is you don't know in that 5-year window when exactly you'll pass. So the question then is, what do you do now? What is it, the goals that you have that you kind of put off in a rational moment, but here your life is coming before you. What do you want to do? And then more severely, the doctor says you have 1 day left to live. So now there really isn't the opportunity to go grab that bucket list. It's over. What did you miss and what did you regret? And the idea of that progression is to try to find something as sort of the why behind why we invest, why we save, why we plan for things, why we protect things through insurance, and all of those things. And so that's a lot of times where we at EP or Clint and I have talked a lot about with clients is, why do you want to do something? What is it that is so important, and why is it? And if we can understand that, then the how kind of falls into place a lot of times, and then we can get back into the idea of persevering through tough times, being patient over the long haul, and so on. So the question, a lot of times, since I've talked a lot about that in past shows with other guests, I asked Clint to come on specifically because the real challenge is, how do you stick with that plan? How do you stick with that goal? Clint oftentimes uses the reference of a personal trainer. It's because we all know, correct me if I'm wrong how you say it, Clint, we all know how to lose weight, right? You exercise more and you eat less.
Generally.
Yeah, so it's not complicated, but it is fairly simple. And so financially, to make another simple analogy here, you could spend less and save more, earn more, right? It's not complicated, but it's also not simple to do because we get pulled in a lot of different directions, right? So there's some discipline here that's required, but there's also some behavioral things that we see a lot. A lot of times people call them academically cognitive biases, but we're just going to say bad behaviors, right? So we can be simple about it here. And so we thought we'd spend some time today talking about some of those, And as we get into some more specifics of them, let's introduce Clint. So Clint is a vice president and partner with EP Wealth Advisors along with me. He and I have worked together for, I don't know, give or take 15 years. He has carried me on his shoulders all this time, as he likes to say.
That's the first time you've ever admitted that.
But we talk a lot as we talk about client situations. How can we get better at this? How can I help this client, understand this concept, or so on and so forth. So there's a lot of back and forth that he and I have, both at EP and years before we were at EP Wealth Advisors. So we are at a firm now. It's a fee-only firm. It's financially planning focused. It's a fiduciary. So we have kind of the chassis that we want to work with. The question is, how can we best kind of work with clients? So, with all of these different behavioral issues that come up from time to time, Clint, what are some of the ones that you find are fairly common?
Well, I think first to piggyback on the 3 different scenarios that you ran, the 5-year, the all the money you ever had without any.
Then the 5 and the 1.
Then the 5 and the 1. I think that's important to point out because it's very easy to get lost in any one of those stages. If all you do is think about the long term, then you don't live today.
Right.
And if all you do is think about, I might die tomorrow, and then for one, you're just really negative the whole time.
Right.
And so I'm a big advocate of balance, and I think you have to continuously look at your long term, but you also can't forget about today. And I think that's important. But with that said, I think in the 25 or so years that I've been working in this business, really mastering yourself and understanding how you personally look at money will help you make better decisions. If you have tendencies that maybe your spouse does not have, it's important to have those conversations. I personally, if I didn't fund my 401k first, I'm likely to spend it. And I'm a financial advisor. So I make sure I head that behavioral tendency off by making sure I fully fund that savings vehicle first. We're human beings, just like our clients are. And we fall prey to the same biases and concerns that our clients may fall into as well. I think it's important that they understand that and that we understand that as well, so that we can sympathize with every decision that they have to make.
Yeah, there was thinking of, as you were talking, a story of another advisor, Carl Richards, right? His backstory. He's more of an educator, I think, at this point in his career, but back in the housing crisis, he bought a house, in his own words, he probably shouldn't have bought. And he had to short sale the house when the economy got crushed. And he was going to leave the business because he felt sort of ashamed that I should know better because I'm an advisor. And your comment is, if I don't do the same things I tell my clients to do, I would actually make the same mistakes, right? It's not because you're smart or have more information, although you are smart and you do have more information than most people. It's an emotional tendency. And the great part about his story was that it was if I recall, his father who said, no, because you made that mistake, it's exactly why you need to stay in the business, because you need to be able to tell people that you have that, and that's normal. And so I think that you bring that to bear, I think, when you're talking to clients.
Well, I think it's important that you have real life situations that you're bringing to the table, not just from your own personal experience, but from experiences of other clients. I think when people have financial problems or any problems, for that matter, it's nice to know you're not alone, right? And so if a client tells you a situation regarding, say, hey, I have college for my kids and it's going to impact my retirement, it's nice to let them know that we have other clients in exactly that situation and to give them that the path that they took to get out of that problem. I think that helps a lot in being able to take the proper step forward. If you feel like you're doing it all alone, it makes it a little scarier to do that.
In spite of all the ads on TV about how you should be independent and kind of go rogue and go on your own, I think we all need some help along the way, right?
Well, I think it's tough. If you're the one who has to shoulder the burden of making the decisions, and in each family it's different. Sometimes it's one spouse over another. Sometimes you're in that what we call the sandwich generation, where you have to take care of not just your own life, but your parents and your kids.
Right.
It's a tough position to be in, and with longevity, with people living till 90, 95 years old, that's becoming more and more common. And there's certainly a lot of distractions on the news, on advertisement you hear on the radio or on TV to want to do the quick fix. And I think what we try to advocate at EP is the long game wins. And we try to make sure we execute on that.
So the idea of the long game, and I've talked a lot about just even today, but thinking of even the last couple of weeks, right? Some of the things I get in front of me, and I think you do too, are folks who will say something along the lines of, I am scared to death of midterm elections, interest rates, evaluations, Brexit. The list is constantly going on. Now, if you went back a couple years, you'll find some similar things. I'm worried about valuations, Brexit. We have a joke. I mean, we talked about all of the various corrections over in this bull run we've had, and one that no one remembers was the Ebola crisis, I believe, in 2013. I mean, no one remembers that at all.
Right.
But the market lost almost 10% on fears that there's going to be some contagion at some point.
Right.
So in the heat of those moments, though, because they won't go away, right? We'll just trade them one for the other. You know, I think, was it not even a year ago, we were worried that North Korea was going to bomb Tokyo or even us.
Right.
And now that seems, for the moment, knock on wood, to have kind of subsided, and then it'll probably be back again.
Right.
So in the heat of that emotional swing, as people listen to whatever they listen to in terms of the source of news, some of the things that come up in terms of that pull them away from their sort of rational, preference. So when we build a financial plan, we say, okay, here's how much you should be able to save. This is how much you should have in insurance. This is how risky your portfolio should or should not be, and so on down the line. They'll say, great, Clint, that's fantastic. I'm with you. Let's do it. We build it. And then fill in the blank happens. Oh my God, we got to go to cash. Or, I need to put everything in something that I think will be guaranteed, or I think, whatever. So one of the things I know I've thought of, we call it anchoring, but this idea that whatever you have heard most recently, for example, recency bias is similar, that you anchor to this, right? So if I have heard that the market's overvalued, I'm anchoring to that. So anything else I hear afterwards, like you come in and saying, well, let's put that into context, might be hard for them to put that into context because they're anchoring to something way over here that may actually not even be real or true or completely factual. How do you address some of those kinds of things?
Well, I think that's why we are there for our clients, is to offer that perspective. It's very easy. Social media has really had a tremendous impact, not only on investments and financial planning and even the financial industry, but the entire world. I mean, there's just so much information out there. It travels very fast, and we don't know how much of it is reliable versus not reliable. And just as there are organizations or people out there that are willing to disseminate bad information about our politics, there's a lot of information out there that may or may not be applicable to a person regarding their finances. And
it's like general rules of thumb and that sort of thing?
Or even the words like, guarantee. The word guarantee comes out a lot in people, and that's what people want to see, is some version of a guarantee. And there are plenty of advertisements out there that says, hey, invest, get the growth of the market and none of the downside. We hear that all the time on satellite radio. If you guys do a lot of driving like I do and Mike does, we spend a lot of time on that. And the reality is there could be a lot of misinformation out there. And it's important to take all of that into context. And when clients forget, it's our job to remind them. It's very easy to agree to and make a decision when there is no test out there, like a Brexit or an election or a war looming or something like that.
Right.
All that gets thrown out the window, it seems, when those events happen. It's our job to remind them that this isn't the first time the world has been in a tough position. I mean, people forget the Cuban Missile Crisis was a pretty scary period of time.
Right.
And ironically, we were talking about the bombing of Korea for either Japan or the United States. I was actually planning a trip to Japan the week or two I was supposed to fly out, and I literally came this close to changing my flights. So I'm not immune, but I called my cousin who lives in Japan. He says, that threat happens all the time. Come on over. The weather's great. So I needed to have that same type of reminder that maybe sometimes it isn't always as acute of a problem as we think it is.
Right. So you kind of dug behind, say, a headline and a couple stories and said, I'm going to explore this beyond what it seems to be on the surface, and found, because you went on and you had a great time, if I recall.
Right, and you have to do a healthy amount of due diligence. I think it's important to let everyone know, whether they're our clients or they are have relationships with their advisors, and that you should ask questions. There's nothing wrong with that. I always tell my clients, you can ask me anything, you won't offend me.
Right.
Because it's true. It's, you want to be comfortable with your decisions. As a matter of fact, I'd rather have those questions come out sooner rather than later, or worse, never hear about it at all, and then find out they were bothered by that for months. I'd rather them tell me, and then if I can't answer that question, I check with my good friend Mike to see if he has an answer to that question, or other.
And the list goes on, because when I don't know, I go.
Well, I think what's also good about our firm is we work as a team, right?
Yeah, right.
And so if either I or you do not have that experience, it's good to check with other members of our team that may either have experience in that area or clients that have had experience in that area, so we can provide that context to clients.
Well, I think one thing, especially as it relates to just the crisis of the moment or the emotion of the moment, is a kind of a reminder, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, about the idea of purpose, or in having an intention with how we plan and how we invest. And for example, a client who wants to give a fair amount of money to charity. They may want to set up their own charity. They may have a certain cause. Clients have, say, their mother, before she died, she was suffered for a long time with Alzheimer's. So that cause was important to them. And so when there might be a kind of a snafu for this week or this day, or, a bear market happens or whatever, because they do happen and they will again, is in that sort of emotion of, oh my gosh, say, wait a minute, let's go back to why, right? Let's go back to what the intention was. This is how we invested. So this is the goal. This is how we're going to accomplish it. And a lot of times when we do planning, we do those Monte Carlos, right? We kind of build in up front. We know there's going to be tough periods. We know there's going to be volatile periods and so on. So we go back to that and remind them. So I think it doesn't always work, right? But it does for a lot of folks to go, you know what? Thank you. You're right. You're right. So I suppose back to the analogy of trying to get in better shape, if you slip, you go on vacation, you don't eat the way you should, and you come back, you feel like a heel, and your trainer says, yeah, that's okay. We kind of figured that was going to happen, but hey, you're on the right track. Let's just get back into the gym. Let's get going.
Right.
It's just someone to go, yeah, you know what? You're right. So okay, I'm good. We'll keep going. Otherwise, you get discouraged, and you kind of let the whole thing get derailed, and that's really the threat to the financial plan. The idea in my mind is, markets come and go, but our behavior is what makes the difference. Right. So, and that's kind of, again, the idea of the show, is to just encourage and inspire people to have those attributes and develop those disciplines, because regardless of what the goals are and how much money they have to invest, I think that's how we can make that work for them.
Well, and I think just to piggyback on what you just said regarding that, I think a lot of clients feel like that period where the planning must end is retirement. Hey, I can't do any more planning past retirement. But they're going to be in retirement for 30 more years, right?
Right.
I mean, planning is an ongoing process. It's just like dieting. So your analogy is very apropos. You don't just diet until you can attend your 30-year or 20. My God, did I say 30-year reunion?
You did.
Mine is next year. So 30-year reunion. And then what? Do you go back to gaining all that weight again? Ideally not.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with your investments. You don't just plan until that date and then that's it. You have to adjust your plan based on the ongoing.
So it's more process than project, more lifestyle than
it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
It truly is. You just expect that you're going to do it the rest of your life.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I think I'm going to cut there because we have a couple other things we want to dig into after the break. But again, you're listening to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath, on KHTS. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath. Again, with me is my guest, Clint Kamua, who's a partner with me at EP Wealth Advisors, a fee-only fiduciary firm. Throughout the West Coast, we do have an office right here in Valencia as well. We've been talking about this idea as the show has progressed over the past year about how to define a purpose and an intention with how we plan for our resources and our money and our investing, and how that gives us the ability to be patient with things and to persevere through setbacks. And the idea being, if we can be sound financially on our own terms, then we would be just more contributory, if you will, to the society around us. So that's kind of our mission and our backdrop. We've been then talking today, though, with Clint about just our joint experience over a couple decades plus of working with a number of people over all these years as to how to stick with it and how do you go about sticking with it with all the emotional tug and pull that we have from the media, that we have from our own circumstances, family situations that come up, all of the above. And so we just started talking about how we have these, we would call in the academic world, cognitive biases, and we would just say sort of emotional sort of habits that sometimes do draw us away. And we talked about anchoring and things of that nature. But I'd like to dig in a little bit more into two more that we see a lot. And the first one of those, believe it or not, and I know it'd be a shock to everybody listening here, is overconfidence. I'm sure none of you in the audience have ever been or known anybody who was overconfident. So we've certainly seen our share. We see advisors too, so professional or non-professional investors have this bias which lends itself towards believing you know something that you really don't or cannot know. For example, someone has told me recently, in light of the upcoming midterm elections, that they know that something's going to happen. The Democrats are going to take over both houses. Trump's going to get impeached. They just know it as if it had already happened. Therefore, they want to make all these changes to their portfolio. So they can't know that by definition because it is, in fact, the future. So I said, well, if you can know that, then I'm going to put all my money with you, or I'm going to go with you to Vegas, because if you can read the future, then, and I certainly can't, then let's go together. So it's obviously not the case, but I thought I'd maybe throw it at you, Clint, just your experience there, because I know you've written about this as well. Your experience with clients or even colleagues that just kind of wrestle with this.
Well, I think it's very easy to fall into. There's a tendency for us to feel like we know something we don't know. It depends on your experience with life. Maybe you've just had negative experience with investing in general.
Yeah.
And so you're looking for a reason for the market to fall, and therefore you feel like you know what's going to happen. It can't continue forever. It's been going on for so long. Right. That's been the big one. We're due for a correction, or we're due for a sell-off. These are things that may or may not be true. Right. However, it's important to look at the data that supports that rather than some feeling or some headline. And I think that's probably the toughest battle we have as advisors, is doing that in a respectful manner, because I believe as their fiduciary, as their guide, if you will, on this journey, we have to make sure that they're seeing what that information is for what it is. Yeah. Information, but take that in the context and in the big picture. I mean, a good example, when Brexit happened, we kept referring to that. I had quite a few clients call me to tell me to get out of the stock market and move all their money to cash as a result of that event, because they just know, the Eurozone is going to fail after Brexit vote happened.
Right. Italy will leave.
It'll be
Portugal will leave.
It's right, exactly. And of course, that did not happen. Same thing happened when Trump got elected. There were people that were very negative about what's going to happen in the country and therefore wanted to sell out. There are plenty of those events. The next one is, obviously, as rates are rising, bonds are going to lose a lot of money. That's the current conversation, right? Our job is to make sure we put that in perspective. And it's not always easy, because the examples we give may not always be this sexy answer, but that's our job. And we have to remind people that being overconfident can actually cost you a lot of money, not just in terms of making the wrong decision, market goes up when it goes down, but also the taxes that are associated with those market timing decisions.
That's a good point. And I think there's something to be fair, and I think you said it well in the sense that it's you need to be respectful. Because I think sometimes what happens is advisors, right? We hear from our investment team who've done loads of research. So we have confidence in a view, whatever that view might be. Someone else might have their own, Red Barons or whatever else research they did on their website or something. And they come in, they have confidence in their view of their opposite, but we're supposed to give them advice. That the challenge as an advisor is not to camp out, if you will, on our own, but to really hear them out at the same time. Right. So confidence is one thing. Overconfidence is the problem.
Right.
So I think and just having a discussion, being willing and open-minded, and I think for me, I always say it's about context. So if rates go up, therefore, yes, generally bonds will do this, that, and the other, but this is how we can work with that, put that into context and try to discuss it with them. So the idea is don't don't blast it, because I wouldn't want someone to do that for me, because it's not like we have the future,
Right.
figured out either. But the more the idea of let's discuss this. And then most importantly, let's put the decisions that you're contemplating in light of your plan.
Right.
So if you're going to time in, you're going to time out because you have a certain political view, or you have a certain view of market valuations, or whatever it is, and you mentioned the tax costs, for example, how is that going to impact the long term as far as the things your why, like what you really wanted to accomplish? So you put that and kind of give them pause a little bit. So most of the time, I don't think we need to rush into these decisions. It feels like it sometimes, but we don't.
Well, and I think I want to add to that too, that it helps to explain what the mechanics are of that portfolio decision. I think there's a misconception out there that we see the future that they can't see, and that isn't true either, right? What we're really doing as investment managers and planners is to try to put the probabilities in your favor. Not that we're trying to get the answer 100% right, but to be more right than wrong. And then when we are wrong, the magnitude of that incorrect information isn't very big. And whenever you make these binary all in or all out decisions, that's when that error is magnified. So let's say you are a little concerned about the market. The answer may not be get out of the market. The answer may be let's revisit our risk and how that ties to my plan. And maybe we ratchet down our risk exposure a little bit, but not this all in or all out decision, which is the tendency that people have to want to address a problem. Right. So again, that's not something I learned last week. It's been over 25 years of experience in the business. I learned a lesson 12 to 15 years ago now, I would say, where I had a belief about something that was against my client's view of the world and the markets, and I did not vocalize it strongly enough. And then when they did what they wanted to do, and it went wrong, they said, well, why did you tell me not to do that? I go, I did tell you. He goes, well, why didn't you tell me stronger? Why didn't you tell me more? Why didn't you remind me? And, we have to do that. And of course, you have to be respectful. It's always very important to do that. At the end of the day, clients, it's your money. You still do what you do,
right?
But we're there as counsel. And that's what we try to do. Just like you may listen to the counsel of your attorneys or your CPAs, well, we're your investment and planning counsel, and that's what we try to do.
Right. I think another element of that which lends itself sometimes to an overconfidence are some just general rules of thumb that get put out there as if it's gospel. Like, I don't want to name names here on the show, but certain people are out there in the world who purport to be advisors say, well, you always should do this, or you should never do that. And so they kind of have this, anchor. We talk about anchoring before the break here. They've anchored to this thought that, so you or I come in and say, I think we should go here. Oh no, I'm supposed to never do that because someone told me that. So again, you bring that into context, because the general rules, no pun intended, generally have a kernel of truth to them for sure. And so you don't want to just throw it out, but you say, okay, well, that is a general across all of the population, maybe idea that can make sense as a place to begin a conversation. But in your context, because of X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C, I think this is how we should approach it. And then again, just have a discussion about it, how in their particular context, with their particular goals in mind, this may make some sense, or conversely may not make some sense, going against the grain of that general rule. So you almost have to stair step some folks down sometimes from overconfidence. And I think advisors have the same tendency too, to be fair. And so I think a lot of times, you mentioned earlier about the team concept. I think that's what's worked well, I think, for you and I at EP, is you have other professionals that sort of knock you up in the head going, hey, you're going too far with this. I think, let's put this in some context yourself. And so you learn and you grow. And so you pass it on to clients.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to make those hard and fast statements like the market will crash on this date, or when it reaches this price, it's going to tank, or whatever. We try to stay away from those because nobody really knows. And, I think during the dot-com bubble, Alan Greenspan at the time, around 1996, if I recall, I have to check my exact dates. That's when he first coined the phrase irrational exuberance.
Right.
And the market did not actually top out until the year 2000. So in theory, the market could continue to quote unquote be irrational for quite a long period of time, which is why it's really important to not get caught up into trying to time that market perfectly. I know we spend a lot of time on timing, but it does impact a lot of things. And so overconfidence can be a problem.
Right, right. Well, another one that I think is apropos in this day and age right now, in addition to these, one I want to bring up for the listeners to think about is the what we call sometimes the confirmation bias. Because I don't know if it's always been the case, but certainly in the last couple of years, 3 years, I personally have seen this the most. And the confirmation bias meaning that I'm going to listen to things that were basically correspond to what I already believe and reinforce that view. And so the view gets deeper and deeper and more ingrained to the point where you can't kind of break out of that box. And I remember early in my career, for example, we were called introduced to a couple in their 70s. And so we went and sat with them, and he was a dentist who was about to retire. So he was a successful person, but his wife had called the meeting, which I thought was strange because he was not happy we were there. So something was up. And what it was, this goes back to right as the market had bottomed. Okay, this was 2009, early 2010. So he had been reading and then rereading all these bearish newsletters, right? We just came out of this horrible 708 kind of market window. And everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop still at that point in 2009 and 10. So thinking that it was just going to happen all over again. And so he just reinforced this view. He kept getting these bearish newsletters, and everything he'd read online would be these sites that were all about bearish, 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 market's going to crash, get out. So he had invested their entire net worth in double, 2 times bearish positions. Now, the market had been going the opposite direction. As you and I know, that's double the loss for him, and literally had lost 2/3 of his net worth at the moment he's going to retire.
Right.
Needless to say, she was a little upset. So we don't know this until
I remember
we sit
that
down.
when we talked about
Yeah, so we're sitting in the kitchen table, just kind of a little speechless. Wasn't sure where to go with that. But the thing that really, of that experience that really sat with me was, I learned a lot from was, at one point, he's frustrated, and he stands up and he pounds the table and he says, "Someday I'm going to be right," because he had to be right. And he was a very genuine guy. He's a very smart guy. There was nothing wrong with him. And so I very quietly said, "But by the time you're right, you may not have any money left. So you will someday be right." When friends or somebody said, "What do you think the market's going to do?" I said, "It's going to go up and then down and then up and then down." Because I don't know.
Right.
So, and they laugh. It's kind of a joke. But in his case, he was so convinced. So that was the biggest example I've ever seen of this confirmation bias. So, but we see it all the time. So where I see it now, and I wanted to get your take on this because you see it, has to do with all the political acrimony, right? So the confirmation, if I listen to MSNBC, therefore the world is what they say it is, or I can listen to Fox News and it's what they say it is, or CNN, or pick your poison, which one you want to do. Because if I'm a conservative, I'm going to lend myself to Fox News, right? Generally, there's other sites too, but and stations. But if I want to listen to Fox News, that reinforces my view. Therefore, and then that comes ultimately to a portfolio decision. So just recently, I had someone, they want to go to cash because they said, those bleepity bleep Democrats are going to win, and therefore the world's going to come to an end. And I had to gently remind him. I said, well, that's what everybody said when Trump got elected. And it isn't about Trump or not. It's about, you don't really know, but you've confirmed this view over and over again. And it becomes, as an advisor, sometimes a hard knot to untie. So I was going to ask you kind of what your experience are with that.
Well, and now it's compounded by social media and artificial intelligence. I mean, if you ever ordered anything on Amazon, let's say you bought something for your Jeep. I just bought a Jeep. Anyway, so you look for some accessory for your Jeep. Mm-hmm. And what do you get after you buy that accessory? You get a little note from Amazon. Say, if you like this, you may also like this. Right. And then so you click on that. Oh, then if you like that, you may also like this. Well, guess what happens when you click on
other than you go broke?
Well, that's where you talk to your financial planner about that.
That's right.
But that happens too when you click on a Facebook ad, and it happens to be, say, a liberal article.
Okay.
You click on that, the AI people, he likes all that liberal stuff, so let's send more liberal stuff, which then continues to bombard you with these things that seem to confirm your notion of whatever your belief might be.
Right.
So if it's an anti-Trump type of article and you liked it, guess what you're going to get more of? More anti-Trump articles. Or if you were the other right and say, if you're a big Trump supporter, guess what you're going to get? Maybe rallies of Trump events or that type of thing. So it's all around you. And I think the awareness of that is important, but it's so subtle, right? It's gradual, it's subtle, and it becomes a part of normal everyday life. I mean, I think you and I are old enough to have been around without social media, but kids today are growing up with only that. It's the way they communicate anymore.
Right.
And so it's very important to be aware of how that can easily and slowly shape your mind.
Right.
And our job is to remind clients of what the other side might look like, regardless of what that other side might be, just so they have a complete picture of how they approach the situation.
Well, let me ask you another question related, because you hear the term a lot now, fake news, right? Which in some case probably is and has been fake news, but in a lot of cases I think is probably just news I don't like.
Right.
So if I don't agree with a premise or the framing of a certain issue in the article or in the newscast or whatever, then it's fake. And that way I can sort of in my mind have peace about dismissing it, because clearly what's only true is what I like to hear, right? We sort of define truth for ourselves at this point, I think, in our culture. But the idea being, though, that if it actually isn't fake, but it is in fact maybe just a contrary opinion on the same issue, I think that's where I personally am wrestling with, because we all do. We have clients that politically across the spectrum. We have clients who, I even have Giants fans. It's horrible. But no, I'm kidding. That was a nod to my sister if she's listening. But people have different persuasions, different ideas, different ways of doing this. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can get in there. Now, I would say my first reaction is, again, context. But to provide context, you need objective information. So when our investment team comes out a couple of times a year with a market update, they'll talk, well, this is actually from the Federal Reserve. This is sort of quote unquote source material is really what they're trying to get to. So is that the only kind of source, or is this more than just a rational intellectual exercise?
Well, I think regardless of what it is you're consuming, you have to try to see what the other side might be. I just came back from a trip in Korea, and trying to understand what that conflict was like, and it gives you context, right? Yeah. To see how the people in South Korea versus North Korea feel about each other. There was that demonstration there from the older generation of South Koreans that were protesting the meeting that the president was about to have with Kim Jong-un, which happened at the time that we were there. And these people, the older folks, remember very clearly what happened during the Korean War. And so that's what's on their mind. But the young generation wasn't around for that. So just trying to see what the other side's viewpoint is very, very important.
Right.
Even if you don't know what that is, just to try to see it is important.
All right. Well, we're going to finish on that a little bit in a second, but for the moment, we're going to pay a few bills. So you're listening to Mike McGrath, and this is your Money Path with Mike McGrath on KHTS AM 1220 and FM 98.1. Well, welcome back, everyone, to your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath, with my guest and colleague, Clint Kamua. As you know, we've been talking a lot about not only the idea of having an intention and a purpose with how we plan our finances and our investments, but talking about some of the things that really pull us away emotionally from sticking with some of those well-laid plans. Clint and I've talked about there's so many, but some of these sort of cognitive biases or these behavioral sort of attitudes and habits that we have, anchoring to information which is incomplete, or being overconfident, or having a bias of confirmation. We're going to listen to basically the echo chamber with whatever views or thoughts that we have confirming that. So these are examples of that. But I think the real heart of the matter that Clint and I want to get to, I think, and we were talking about this off air, is really to talk more about how we can avoid it, right? Because we all have some kind of tendency. We don't all have the same tendency towards a specific bias per se, but we have some tendency to do it. And as advisors, and all the years that we've been doing this, Clint and I, it's trying to understand what those might be and kind of coach through those. So I think, and we were talking about, I think the main thing I would say, if you agree, Clint, that would help us kind of stick with that intention and with that purpose is really to fully develop your financial plan, to frequently come back to that financial plan and just either reconfirm that is where you are and who you are and what's important to you, or as life changes, right, to adjust to it. So, for example, my wife and I have a sort of a financial plan, and later on we have a child. Well, that changes things, right? Or we move to a different part of the country, that changes things. So the plan has to be flexible. But the idea, I think, more than that is just that the plan would really be sort of the heartbeat of what we do and why. I mean, so we were talking about that. I would gather your thoughts if you agree or would add to that.
Well, yeah, it's just like when a pilot decides to take a trip from one location to another, he has a flight plan.
Yeah.
Right? And as long as everything that he or she expects out of that flight takes place, and they just stay on the path. But then sometimes you hit turbulence, right? So maybe they have to fly above that weather, for example. On our trip to Korea, that's exactly what happened. There was
Right.
a lot of turbulence. So the pilot had to fly higher than where he was planning on flying. It's a course correction. It's still going towards the same goal, which is to get to
Right.
Korea or Hong Kong or wherever the flight is. But it's important for you to be able to be willing to make those changes. As long as that's still in the direction you're headed, I think that's very important.
Okay. And I think I would add to fortify that, and I'd leave a couple more points. So the first would be to stick with the plan, even though you have to make adjustments. But how you even do that is to be grounded in that why, be grounded in that bigger thing.
Right.
So if it's just because I want to have more material things, that may not be, really the end goal. But like Tim Maurer, recently, one of his books, I read his, and he said, wealth equals enough. And that may not be more.
Right.
So I always think about that. So be grounded in something bigger. And then as you address the day-to-day and the markets, you address those course corrections, which might be important and necessary, is I'm borrowing from Stephen Covey, another author here, and he said, seek to understand before you seek to be understood. Seek to understand the circumstance. You mentioned it before the break, why someone else might have a different view from you. Seek to understand that first before you make decisions. So with that, I think we'll leave it. Again, thank you for listening. Again, this is Mike McGrath with Your Money Path with Mike McGrath, and it's KHTS AM 1220 and FM 98.1.